Hi, my name is Rachel Donovan. I'm 39 years old. I have a master's degree in business administration, a real estate broker's license in 4 states, and for 11 consecutive years, I ran my father's commercial real estate company with everything I had. I mean everything. My weekends, my marriage, my sleep, my health, my 20s, and most of my 30s. 11 years of my life poured into a business that was, in every way that actually mattered, more mine than anyone else's. And on a Tuesday afternoon in October, I walked into a conference room on the 14th floor of our downtown Phoenix office building, the building whose lease I had personally negotiated, at a rate 12% below market, and I want you to remember that detail. And I found out that my brother had been named CEO, majority shareholder, and sole heir to a company I had spent over a decade building from the ground up. My brother Marcus, who had worked at the company for 3 years, who spent most of those 3 years learning how to use the coffee machine, forwarding emails he didn't understand to me, and showing up 45 minutes late to meetings where I had prepared every single item on the agenda. I want to be very clear about something before I go any further. I am not someone who tells this story with a lot of crying. I'm not built that way. I'm someone who sat very still in that conference room while my father explained his decision, and then I drove home alone, sat at my kitchen table with a glass of water, and opened a folder on my laptop that I had been maintaining quietly, methodically for almost 2 years. Because here's the thing about spending 11 years as the most meticulous person in every room you walk into. You keep records, you keep all of them. Every email, every meeting summary, every financial discrepancy that didn't sit right, every verbal commitment that should have been in writing but wasn't. You keep all of it because that is your nature and because some part of you, some quiet, observant, never fully silenced part of you, already knows that the moment will come when the records matter. And when the person who built something from the ground up gets erased from it, the records have a funny way of becoming the most important thing in the room. If you've ever worked twice as hard as everyone around you and still been passed over, because of your gender, because of who you were born as, because someone decided that loyalty and results didn't matter as much as bloodline, you already know exactly what I'm about to tell you. Stay with me. Because this ending took almost 2 more years to arrive after that conference room. But when it arrived, it was thorough, and it was documented. Let me tell you about Donovan Realty Group, because you need to understand what it was before I got there in order to fully understand what it was when I left and what it cost both of us when the truth finally came out. My father, Gerald Donovan, started the company in 1998 with a single commercial property in Tucson, Arizona, a small strip mall. 4 tenants, all local businesses, a dry cleaner, a nail salon, a sandwich shop, and a tax preparation service that was only open 3 months a year. He was a salesman by instinct and a dreamer by nature, and he genuinely deeply loved real estate in the way that some people love the sea. Not because they've mastered it, but because its scale makes them feel like anything is possible. In the early years, the business did okay. Not great, not remarkable, just okay. He hired a small staff, a property manager, an administrative assistant, a part-time bookkeeper named Connie, who I would later find out had been filing things in a system that made sense only to Connie and no one else on earth. He managed a handful of properties, made decent money, paid his mortgage, and told anyone who would listen at industry events that he was going to take the company national someday. He meant it. That's the thing about my father that I want you to hold on to through this entire story. He wasn't a fraud in the beginning. He was a man with a genuine vision who lacked the organizational discipline and the operational knowledge to execute it. He needed someone who understood how to translate a dream into a system. He needed someone who could sit down with a lender and speak the language, who could build an acquisition model, who could look at a market and understand the risk profile before anyone signed anything. He needed me. He just didn't know how to honor what that meant. By 2009, when I joined the company, Donovan Realty Group had 12 properties under management, revenues of about $2 million annually, and a back office that ran on spreadsheets that hadn't been updated since 2004. My father was 61 years old, tired in the way that men get tired when they've been running at the same pace for too long without quite getting to where they wanted to go, and his idea of strategic planning was writing things on a whiteboard in red marker and hoping the universe would fill in the steps. I had just finished my MBA at the University of Arizona. I was 28 years old. I had 3 job offers, real ones from commercial real estate firms in Phoenix and Denver, the kind of firms with structured career paths and employee development programs, and 401k matching. I turned all 3 of them down because my father called me the week before graduation and said, "Rachel, I need someone who understands this business the way I don't. Give me 1 year, 1 year, I'll make it worth your while." I said yes because I loved him, and because some part of me, the part that had grown up watching him make promises he couldn't quite keep, genuinely believed that if someone competent got their hands on what he'd built, it could become something real, something that matched the version in his head. I gave him 1 year, and then another, and then 9 more after that. What I did in those 11 years, and I want to be measured here, not boastful because the facts matter for what comes later, was transform the company from a regional mom-and-pop operation into a legitimate multi-state enterprise. I built out a property management infrastructure from scratch, replacing Connie's filing system with actual software and actual processes. I negotiated acquisition deals that expanded the portfolio from 12 properties to 63. I hired and developed the team, from a staff of 6 when I arrived to 22 full-time employees when I left. I managed the lender relationships. I brought in the legal and accounting talent that allowed us to operate across state lines. I opened offices in Phoenix, Las Vegas, and Albuquerque. I took the annual revenue from $2 million to over $14 million. I made the company worth what it was worth, and by 2021, what it was worth was approximately $42 million according to the independent valuation that our lenders commissioned that year. My father was still the owner, still the face of the business at industry events, still the one who got the handshakes at the Arizona Commercial Real Estate Association dinners, and the "Gerald, you've built something remarkable here" speeches from people who had watched the company grow without necessarily understanding who had been doing the growing. And I was fine with that for a long time. Genuinely. He built the foundation. I respected the foundation. I wasn't there for the public credit. I was there because I believed in the work and because I believed in him. But what I was not fine with, and this is where I need to start being very specific, because specificity is what this story runs on, was what happened with Marcus. My brother Marcus is 4 years younger than me. He grew up in the same house, had the same parents, attended the same schools, and somehow became an entirely different kind of person. Not a bad person. I want to be careful about that because easy villainy is something I distrust. Marcus was not mean. He was not deliberately cruel. He was charming and funny and genuinely likable in the way that certain people are likable. The kind of person who walks into a room and within 10 minutes everyone at the party knows his name and is laughing at something he said. He was just permanently, fundamentally unfinished. He bounced between jobs throughout his 20s the way some people browse streaming services, always moving, always finding something new to be briefly enthusiastic about, never staying long enough to actually complete anything. There was the sales job in Tempe that lasted 14 months, the restaurant venture with a college friend that burned through $60,000, and a friendship in under a year. A stretch in San Diego doing something he described as real estate adjacent marketing consulting, which he explained differently every time someone asked, and which I eventually concluded was not a real job in any traditional sense. He was 32 when he joined Donovan Realty Group in 2017. My father had been hinting at it for months beforehand, each hint wrapped in the language of opportunity and family and giving someone a chance. Marcus is ready to find his footing. Marcus has good instincts, Rachel. He just needs the right environment. Family businesses are supposed to keep it in the family. That's the whole point. I went into it with a genuinely open mind. I did. I sat down and designed a role for Marcus that played honestly to his actual strengths: business development and client relationships, representing the company at networking events and industry functions, being the personable face of Donovan Realty in rooms where charm was more useful than spreadsheet literacy. It was a real role. It had real value. I didn't set him up to fail. For the first 6 months, it worked reasonably well. Marcus showed up. He attended events. He brought in 2 new clients, both of whom he had met at a charity golf tournament, and both of whom, he told me over dinner one night with his characteristic self-aware humor, had agreed to meetings mostly because of the open bar. But they were clients. They signed contracts. It counted. And then I started noticing something. The way my father talked about Marcus when Marcus was in the room versus when he wasn't. When Marcus was present in a meeting or at an event, my father would light up in a way I had never seen him light up around me. He would retell the golf tournament story as though Marcus had executed a masterclass in business development strategy. He'd ask Marcus's opinion on deals with a kind of eager interest that I had never experienced from him. Not because Marcus's opinions were particularly informed or useful, but because asking Marcus seemed to make my father feel like a father, like he was doing something meaningful, like he was sculpting his legacy in real time. And I started hearing a word: heir. Not stated directly to me, not in any meeting or formal conversation, but in the way my father talked to his friends and to the company's outside partners. My son is getting involved in the business, really starting to see himself as the heir to what we've built here. I heard it secondhand from our property manager, Jamie, who mentioned it to me casually one afternoon and then caught my expression and went a little quiet. I should have confronted it then. Walked into my father's office, sat down, and said, "Dad, I need to know what your plans actually are. Not the version you've told me in general terms a dozen times. The actual plan in specifics, with my name in it or not." But I didn't. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself that 11 years of results spoke louder than anything I could say in a conversation. I told myself my father was a fair man who kept his promises. I made that choice. And it is one of the 2 choices in this story that I will spend a long time making my peace with. I need to tell you about my marriage. It's part of this story even though I genuinely wish it weren't, because weaving the personal and the professional together is the most honest way to show you what those years actually cost. His name was Daniel Reyes, a civil engineer from Scottsdale with a calm practicality that I had found immediately appealing when we met at a real estate industry conference in 2012. We were both standing in line for coffee that was being described as artisanal, but was obviously from a hotel banquet urn, and we said so to each other at the same moment and then laughed. We were married in 2014, in a ceremony that was small and exactly right. His family was warm and funny, and completely unprepared for how serious I was about my work, which they found alternately impressive and slightly alarming. Daniel was patient with me in the way that genuinely good people are patient, not infinitely, because infinite patience is not a human quality, but substantially, consistently, with full awareness of what he was choosing. He was patient with the calls that came at 7 on Saturday morning, patient with the vacations that got shortened or rescheduled or canceled entirely when an acquisition deal moved faster than expected, patient with the weekends that existed on paper but were in practice just work days with different scenery. He stayed patient until 2018, and then he sat across from me at our kitchen table on a Saturday evening when I had come home at 8 o'clock having promised to be back at 4, and he said something that I have thought about many times since. "Rachel," he said. He was very calm, which was always how Daniel was when he'd decided something. "I think you're married to that company. I don't think you've noticed yet, but I've noticed, and I've been watching you not notice for about 4 years, and I can't keep being the person who watches." I sat with that. I wanted to argue. I had the argument ready, the investments I was protecting, the position I was building, the future that was almost within reach. And then I looked at him across the table, and I understood that he was not wrong. And that the fact that he was not wrong and I still couldn't change the behavior was itself the answer. We divorced in 2019, without screaming, without lawyers fighting over furniture or savings accounts. Just 2 people who had grown into different shapes during the years they'd been growing and who could no longer fit the same space.
I don't blame Daniel. I don't blame the company. I blame the thing I could not, at 28 years old, standing in a parking lot with my father on the phone, have foreseen. That I was investing everything I had into something that was not legally mine, and never would be unless my father chose to make it so. That's the thing about building someone else's dream on the assumption that love and loyalty are a reliable currency. They're not. They're real, but they're not currency. 2020 arrived and nearly destroyed the commercial real estate industry, and very specifically tried to destroy us. I worked around the clock for the better part of 12 months. I personally led the renegotiation of 9 tenant lease agreements that would otherwise have ended in defaults and vacancies. I restructured 3 of our largest loans with lender relationships I had been cultivating for years. And I want to be specific about this because cultivating a lender relationship means being the person who called that relationship manager when they were having a hard quarter, who remembered their kids' names, who was consistently honest about our portfolio performance even when honest wasn't comfortable. I had done all of that work. The relationships were mine even though the name on the business card said Donovan Realty Group. My father during 2020 was largely unreachable. He had turned 63 in February, and the stress of the pandemic seemed to accelerate a process that had already been underway. His desire to step away, to let someone else carry the weight. He was spending increasing amounts of time at his property in Sedona. He called the office less. When he called me, he asked general questions about the state of the business in the way that someone asks about a friend they haven't seen in a while. Sincerely, but from a distance, with no expectation of being handed the solution. Marcus, during 2020, worked from home. He attended some Zoom calls. He forwarded some emails. He called me once in April to ask how to process an expense report for a client dinner that had been canceled, which meant the expense report shouldn't have existed. I walked him through it with the particular patience of someone who has approximately 400 more urgent things to do, and is doing this one because the alternative is explaining why it can't be done, which takes equally as long. And somehow, and this is the piece I have spent the most time trying to understand about my father, Marcus's relative presence in that year seemed to increase his significance to my father rather than diminish it. I think it was because Marcus called him. While I was managing the survival of the business, Marcus was managing the personal relationship. He drove up to Sedona some weekends. He had dinner with my father. He sat in the living room of the house where we grew up, and he was physically, warmly, personally present in a way that I, buried under 11 million urgent things, was not. My father was a man who responded to presence, to being chosen, and Marcus, who had nothing more structurally important to do, chose him consistently. While I chose the company, while I always chose the company, this is not an excuse for what my father did, but it is a true thing about how it happened. By 2021, the company had not just recovered from the pandemic, it had grown through it. We had moved quickly on 3 distressed property acquisitions during the worst of 2020, when prices were suppressed and competition was limited, and those acquisitions were already showing strong returns by mid-2021. Our portfolio was the strongest it had ever been. I was genuinely proud of that. The kind of pride that lives in your chest and feels earned because it was. My father announced in the spring of 2021 that he intended to formally retire at year's end. He convened a planning process. He brought in an outside advisory firm, a firm called Meridian Transitions, based in Scottsdale, that specialized in family business succession, and he asked both Marcus and me to participate in the process. He also asked Frank Okafor, our company attorney whom I had hired in 2014 and trusted completely, to prepare the relevant legal documentation for the ownership and leadership transition. And here is where I made my last and largest mistake in this entire story. I assumed. I assumed that the structure being built was the one my father had committed to, verbally, repeatedly, and in one critical instance, in writing. I had been told by my father in 2016, sitting in his office after we closed a major acquisition, that when he stepped back, the company was mine. His exact words were, "You've built this, Rachel. This is your company. I just need a few more years to feel ready." In 2018, after we opened the Las Vegas office and our revenue crossed 10 million for the first time, he said it again, almost word for word. When the time comes, you'll be taken care of. You have my word on that. And in 2018, following Frank's recommendation that significant verbal succession commitments be documented in board minutes as a matter of standard practice, Frank had flagged this as a liability exposure for everyone, not just me. My father had agreed. He had sat in Frank's office and he had confirmed the commitment on the record. The board minutes from that meeting exist. My father's signature is on them. He signed them. That is the detail I want you to hold on to from this entire middle section of the story. So, in the fall of 2021, when the Meridian Transitions people were running their process and Frank was preparing documents and everything seemed to be in motion, I made the decision to trust. To not helicopter over every detail of the legal work the way I helicoptered over every operational detail of the business. To assume that the documented commitment from 2018 was being honored in the structure being built. I did not ask to review the documents until they were finalized. That is the mistake. One mistake, in 11 years of nearly flawless judgment, one moment of choosing faith over verification, and it cost me everything, temporarily. I say temporarily, hold on to that too. The board meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday in October 2021. I remember the morning clearly because it was the kind of morning that feels normal in retrospect, only in the sense that nothing in it warned you. I drove downtown in traffic that was unremarkable. I stopped at the cafe on the lobby level of our building and ordered a flat white from a barista named Tyler, who had been making my coffee for 3 years and who asked me if I was excited about the big day. Getting there, I told him. Which was true. I had a genuine anticipation about what the meeting would formalize, a sense of arrival after a very long journey. I took the elevator to 14. I walked down the hallway past the offices I had designed the layout for, past the reception desk with the plant I had chosen, specifically because it required almost no maintenance, and I knew realistically that no one would water anything fussy. I went into the conference room with the west-facing windows and the view of the mountains that I had specifically requested when I negotiated the lease on the space. My father was already there, and Marcus, and a man from the Meridian Transitions firm named Craig, whose last name I genuinely cannot recall because within 30 seconds of the meeting starting, I lost the ability to retain peripheral information. My father opened the meeting with a speech about legacy, about family, about the importance of keeping the Donovan name at the center of Donovan Realty Group as the company moved into its next chapter. He was warm and a little emotional in the way he got when he was saying something he'd prepared in advance. He talked about how proud he was of everything the company had become. And then Craig set a document on the table in front of me. I looked at it. I am a fast reader. I had it processed in under 30 seconds. Marcus Donovan, Chief Executive Officer, 60% ownership stake. Rachel Donovan, retained consultant, 12-month contract, renewable at the board's discretion. Consultant, 12 months, at the board's discretion. I remember the exact texture of the silence in that room after I finished reading those 2 lines. I remember my father looking at the table. I remember Marcus's hands on the arms of his chair in the particular way of a man who has been told to be still and is working at it. I remember Craig clicking his pen. Once, twice, 3 times. And what I remember most clearly is the feeling that came over me, which was not the feeling I would have predicted if you had asked me beforehand what I would feel in this moment. It wasn't rage. It wasn't tears. It wasn't the dizzying vertigo of betrayal. It was stillness. Complete, specific, operational stillness. The kind I had learned to recognize in myself when a situation was moving faster than my emotions could process, and the only useful thing to do was to be very, very clear. I asked 2 questions. The first was whether the 2018 board minutes had been factored into the legal review of the transition documents. My father said they had been reviewed. The outside advisors had determined they were, quote, informal in nature and not legally binding succession commitments. The second question I asked was whether this decision was final. My father said yes. I thanked everyone for their time. I collected my copy of the document. I walked to the elevator. I pressed the lobby button. I rode down 14 floors in silence. I walked to the parking garage. I got into my car. I drove for approximately 3 minutes, and then I pulled into an empty section of the garage on the street level, and I put the car in park, and I cried for 4 minutes and 14 seconds, which I know because I happened to look at the clock when I started and again when I stopped. Then I opened my laptop, and I opened the folder.
I need to step back before I tell you about the folder, because the folder changes the nature of this story, and I want you to understand it fully. During my 11 years at Donovan Realty Group, I had full access to all financial records. Every one. I managed the accounts, supervised the bookkeeping team, worked directly with our external auditors each fiscal year. It was entirely within my job description and my day-to-day function to understand where every dollar that moved through that company came from and where it went. Starting in 2019, I began noticing things. Small things at first, the kind of thing that catches a careful eye without necessarily meaning anything. Vendor payments to companies I didn't recognize and had not authorized.
Consulting fees that didn't correspond to any consulting engagement I was aware of. Disbursements categorized in ways that were slightly off from our standard accounting structure, not dramatically wrong, just imprecise in a way that a less attentive eye would have filed under someone else's problem. I flagged these to our bookkeeper, a careful woman named Denise who I trusted. She told me the disbursements had been authorized directly by my father, and that she had the paperwork for each one. When I brought the pattern to Frank, he reviewed what he could access, and told me that while the categorization was sloppy, the disbursements were within my father's authority as majority shareholder and owner. There was nothing structurally improper that he could identify. I accepted that. I noted it. I kept the documentation. In 2020, the pattern intensified. Larger consulting fees, different vendors, categorizations that kept shifting in ways I found difficult to explain. During a year when we were fighting genuinely hard to preserve the financial integrity of the business, there were outflows that created the kind of quiet tension in me that I had learned, after 11 years, to take seriously. I flagged them again. I received similar responses. I kept documenting. I want to be careful about what I say here because certain legal proceedings are still ongoing. What I will tell you is that by 2021, I had assembled a folder. Not as a weapon, not with any strategic intent, but because I am constitutionally incapable of seeing a pattern and not recording it. That contained 2 years of financial records, vendor payment histories, consulting fee authorizations, bank reconciliation discrepancies, and a set of cross-referenced notes that would later be described by a forensic accountant as, and I am quoting him directly, unusually thorough for a non-accounting professional. I had not looked at the folder with any particular purpose until I was sitting in that parking garage on a Tuesday afternoon in October with a document in my lap that had reduced 11 years of my life to a 12-month consulting contract. And when I looked at the folder that evening with completely new eyes, not the eyes of a concerned COO trying to maintain clean books, but the eyes of a woman who had just been told that her contribution to a company worth $42 million was worth a year of contract consulting. What I saw made me put the laptop down and sit in my quiet kitchen for a very long time. Because when you look at a collection of financial irregularities, not as isolated accounting anomalies, but as a pattern over 2 years, when you lay them end to end, and you see not just what each one is, but what they are collectively, you see something different than what you saw in each individual piece. You see a picture, and the picture has a name. I am going to skip forward slightly here because some of what came in the immediate aftermath of the board meeting was personal in ways that I am still working through, and because some of it involves other people whose stories are not entirely mine to tell. What I will tell you is that I spent the week after the board meeting doing 3 things. I reached out to Frank and told him I would be resigning from the company at the end of the month, and that I needed to understand my legal options with respect to the 2018 board minutes. I did not respond to my father's calls. He called me 3 times in the first 4 days, including once from a Sedona landline I didn't recognize, and I let all of them go. And I did not respond to Marcus's email, which arrived on Wednesday, and which said he hoped I wasn't upset, that he knew this wasn't ideal, that he hoped we could work together going forward, and, in the third paragraph, with a casual lightness that I spent a significant amount of time analyzing, could I please send him the login credentials for the property management software? I forwarded the email to Frank without comment. Frank referred me to Patricia Helm. Patricia runs a small corporate and securities law firm in downtown Phoenix, and she is, without qualification, one of the most precise human beings I have ever been in a room with. She listened to my complete account, all of it, from 2009 to October 2021, without interrupting me once. When I finished, she asked 3 questions in sequence. How complete is the documentation in the folder? How was it obtained? Have you shared it with anyone? My answers: very complete, in the normal course of my authorized job function, and only with you and with my previous attorney in general terms. She looked at me for a moment with the expression of a person doing a specific and careful calculation. Then she said, I need you to go home and make me a complete chronologically organized copy of everything in that folder, and then I need you back here on Thursday. I went home. I organized the folder. I came back Thursday. Patricia spent 3 hours reading through it. She said very little. At one point, she stepped out to make a phone call, and I sat in her conference room looking at the Phoenix skyline and doing something I hadn't done in years, just sitting still without working. When she came back, she sat down and said, I want to bring in a forensic accountant, with your permission. The forensic accountant's name was David Lau. He was meticulous and quiet, and he asked me questions over 2 days that confirmed he understood both numbers and narrative. At the end of his review, he presented his findings to Patricia and me in a meeting that lasted 2 hours. I am not going to detail those findings, not because I want to protect my father from what he did, but because the relevant proceedings are still ongoing, and I have been advised. What I will tell you is what Patricia said to me at the end of that meeting, after David had left the room and it was just the two of us. She said, Rachel, what David has found moves this significantly beyond the scope of an employment claim. You have documented evidence of a pattern of financial conduct that warrants a formal report to the Securities and Exchange Commission. As your attorney, I am obligated to inform you of that. And I want to be honest with you. Your authorized access to this documentation and your documented awareness of the pattern creates a potential exposure for you if you fail to report what you have reason to believe. I sat with that for a long time in the silence of her conference room. This was my father, the man who taught me to drive in a church parking lot on a Sunday morning when I was 15, steering wheel enormous in my hands, his voice completely calm when I hit the curb. The man who sat in the bleachers at every single one of my college track meets, who always wore the same blue cap, who always said the same thing when I finished. I knew it, whether I won or came in fourth. The man who asked me to give him 1 year and to whom I had given 11. Patricia gave me 5 days to sit with it. She called on the 6th. I've made my decision, I told her. All right, she said. I'm filing. A brief pause. The particular pause of a lawyer who has heard this answer before and knows what it means. All right, she said again. Let's walk through the process. Let me tell you something about the SEC complaint process that nobody tells you when they imagine what it looks like. It is not a movie scene. There is no dramatic confrontation. No one arrives at your father's office with agents in navy jackets and boxes. You fill out a form. You attach documentation. You submit it through a secure portal. You receive a confirmation number. And then you wait, and the waiting is quiet. And during the quiet, your life continues in all the ordinary ways that life continues, even when you've done something that feels enormous. I filed in January 2022, 3 months after the board meeting. During those 3 months, I had also, with Patricia's guidance, filed a civil suit against my father and Donovan Realty Group for breach of the documented commitments in the 2018 board minutes, for wrongful termination of my operational authority without the transition process that had been committed to, and several related claims. And I need to be honest with you about something here, because I think it matters. The civil suit and the SEC complaint were related in origin, but very different in nature. The civil suit was about what was done to me. It was personal. The SEC complaint was about what had been done to the company's financial integrity, and potentially to the investors and lenders and business partners who had operated in good faith on the assumption that the company's financial representations were accurate. I filed both because both were warranted, and because Patricia made it very clear that failing to report what I had documented knowledge of was not a neutral choice with no consequences. I am not a hero in this story. I want to say that plainly. I am a woman who was wronged and who used the tools available to her, both for herself and because the law required the second tool. That's what I am. The months between filing and any visible result were the hardest of this entire experience. Not the board meeting, not the divorce, not any of the loud and dramatic moments. The quiet ones, the months of living on savings, of turning down 2 job offers because some part of me still hadn't fully accepted that I was starting over, of going to therapy twice a week with a therapist named Dr. Amara, who was patient with my particular brand of grief in ways I am still grateful for. The thing about losing work that is also your identity is that the grief is strange and complicated, and other people don't always know how to respond to it. People said things like, "You'll find something new," and "This is finally your chance to rest." And I would smile and nod and go home and sit with the specific, unaddressed feeling of having lost not just a job, but 11 years of trust in the person I had most trusted. Dr. Amara understood the difference. She never tried to talk me out of the grief. She helped me understand what the grief was made of, which turned out to be several different things that I had been carrying simultaneously and had not separated out. My father reached out twice during that stretch, once through my Aunt Carol, who called me in February to say in her gentle way that my father was worried about me, that he missed me, that he hoped I knew that. I thanked her and changed the subject. Once in a handwritten letter that arrived in March, his handwriting a little unsteady, 2 pages saying that he missed me and that he hoped we could find a way through this. He did not say he was sorry. He did not say he had been wrong. He said he hoped, which is what people say when they want the outcome without the accountability. I showed the letter to Patricia. We dated it, noted it, filed it. Marcus sent 2 more emails that I forwarded to Patricia without responding. In the second one, he sounded less casual and more strained, which told me the legal process was beginning to make its presence felt. The first concrete development came in June 2022. Patricia called to tell me that the SEC had formally opened an inquiry based on the documentation submitted. This did not mean a predetermined outcome. It meant the submission had been reviewed and deemed worthy of investigation. She said this as precisely as she always said things. "What does that mean practically?" I asked. "It means they're looking," she said. The civil case moved faster than the regulatory timeline. By September 2022, we had been through several rounds of discovery and 2 mediation sessions. My father's legal team, a large Phoenix firm billing at rates that I estimated were 3 times Patricia's, made 2 settlement offers in those sessions that we rejected. Both significantly undervalued the documented commitments and the measurable contribution of my work to the company's growth. Patricia and I were aligned on that. The third offer came in November 2022. I'm not going to disclose the specific amount. What I will tell you is that it had a substantial cash component, a 5-year structured payout, and one item that was not monetary at all, and that I had specifically requested, and that Patricia had told me we might not get. A formal written acknowledgement, in the settlement agreement itself, signed and notarized, that my contribution to the development and growth of Donovan Realty Group had been fundamental to the company reaching its current value. My father had to sign a legal document that said I built his company. Patricia asked me if the terms were acceptable. I sat with the settlement agreement for a long time in her office. Then I said yes. I cried when I signed it. Not the 4-minute crying in the parking garage. The other kind. The kind that doesn't have a clear category, that comes from a place where grief and relief and exhaustion and something that might be called vindication are all occupying the same space at the same time. I cried for about 20 minutes, and Patricia went and got me a glass of water and didn't say anything, which was exactly right. In the spring of 2023, there were developments in the SEC matter. Significant ones. I am limited in what I can say about specifics, but I will tell you that the developments were serious enough to be reported in the Phoenix Business Journal. I read the article once, carefully and completely, and then I closed the tab. Marcus was removed as CEO of Donovan Realty Group in April 2023. The board had no real alternative. My father's attorney reached out to Patricia in May 2023, not about my civil settlement, which was resolved, about something else that I had not anticipated. My father was scared, not only because of the legal exposure, though that was real and ongoing, but because of what was happening to the company. The $42 million company that bore his name. The strip mall in Tucson that had grown into 63 properties across 4 states. The thing he had spent 25 years building, and that I had spent 11 years turning into something that actually matched the version he had always carried in his head. It was struggling, visibly. The leadership vacuum, the loss of client confidence, the reputational damage of a visible regulatory inquiry. Commercial real estate is a business built on relationships, and relationships do not survive this kind of disruption cleanly or quickly. I knew this. I had been the relationship architecture for 11 years. I understood exactly what was being lost and how hard it would be to rebuild. I thought about it for a long time, about whether I bore any responsibility for the company's suffering, about what it would feel like to watch Donovan Realty Group collapse entirely, about the 22 employees and the 63 properties and the tenants and lenders who had nothing to do with what my father and my brother had done. I felt grief, real, genuine, complicated grief. Not for my father the way I once would have felt it. That relationship has been altered in ways that don't fully repair, but for the company, for the thing I had loved most and worked hardest for, now suffering for reasons that were set in motion long before I ever opened a folder or called a lawyer. I did not cause my father's decisions. I did not cause the conduct that warranted the SEC inquiry. I reported what I was ethically and legally required to report. Those things are true. And it is also true that grief is not rational. You can do the right thing and still feel the weight of what it costs. I am learning, slowly, to let both of those things exist without resolving one into the other. My father and I spoke for the first time in almost 2 years in August of 2023, in person at Patricia's office, with both attorneys present. He looked older than the last time I had seen him. Smaller in the way that isn't entirely physical, the kind of smallness that comes when a person has finally reckoned honestly with a decision they made and found the cost much higher than any calculation they ran beforehand. He said he was sorry before anyone else said anything, directly, without preamble, at the start of the meeting. He said he was sorry for what he had done to me, that he knew sorry wasn't sufficient, and that he wasn't asking me to tell him it was. I didn't tell him it was. I said I heard him. I meant it. I also meant that hearing something is not the same as being healed by it, and that I wasn't going to perform a forgiveness I hadn't arrived at yet just to make the room more comfortable. We talked for about an hour. Not warmly. Warmth requires a ground that this conversation didn't yet have. But honestly, in a way I don't think my father and I had ever actually talked during the 11 years I was running his company. About what he had believed when he made the decision. About the specific logic, the sentimental logic, the proximity logic, the Marcus needs this more than Rachel does because Rachel is strong logic, that had felt, to him, like love and had landed in my life as the worst thing anyone had ever done to me. He said, "I thought you'd land on your feet. I thought you were strong enough." I said, "I know you did. That's the part that will take me longest to forgive." He didn't have an answer for that. He nodded. He looked at the table. We did not hug when the meeting ended. We said goodbye in the hallway like two people who were once something to each other and are trying to figure out what version of that something is still possible after this. I don't know yet. I'm not going to pretend I do. Before I tell you about what I built next, I want to tell you about the day I cleaned out my office. Because I think it deserves to be in this story. I went in on a Saturday in November 2021, 2 weeks after the board meeting and 3 days before my official last day. I had chosen a Saturday deliberately because I didn't want an audience. I didn't want colleagues standing in doorways trying to find the right expression. I didn't want anyone to feel obligated to say something meaningful when there was nothing meaningful left to say about the situation. I had a single banker's box. I had always worked lean, not many personal items in the office, not the kind of person who decorates with photographs and sentiment. A spare cardigan, a phone charger, a small framed print that a former colleague had given me after the Las Vegas opening, a quote about persistence that I had always liked and that felt, in that moment, both appropriate and slightly cruel. I took one full walk through the office before I left. Past the conference rooms I had booked 10,000 times. Past the property management team's area with the whiteboards covered in occupancy tracking I had designed the format for. Past the kitchen where Tyler's cousin sometimes brought in breakfast pastries on Fridays, and where I had eaten approximately 800 lunches standing up because there was always something more urgent than sitting down. I stopped at the window at the end of the hallway, the west-facing one with the mountain view, the one I had specifically requested. I stood there for maybe 3 minutes, looking at the mountains. Thinking about the 28-year-old who had walked into this company with a single year promised and had never found a reason to leave, right up until the reason was handed to her in a conference room on the 14th floor. Then I picked up my box, and I took the elevator down, and I walked out into the November afternoon, and I did not look back at the building. Some exits don't need ceremony. They just need to be completed. I started a new company in early 2023. My own. My name on the LLC. My name on the ownership documents. My name on the broker's license that anchors everything. I have two partners, former colleagues from Donovan Realty Group, who resigned after the leadership transition collapsed and who called me because they wanted to build something with someone they trusted. We started from zero. We have 17 properties under management as of this month. We have one office in Scottsdale and a second opening in Tempe in the spring. 17 properties from nothing. In under 2 years. I know what I'm doing. I have always known what I'm doing. That was never in question. Not for me, not for the people who worked with me, not for the lenders and tenants and industry contacts who have been calling to reconnect since the moment word got out that I was building something new. The question was never competence. The question was always who gets to hold what the competence builds. I hold it now. Every contract, every property, every relationship, every decision. Mine. Legally, structurally, completely, without any dependence on anyone else's willingness to acknowledge it. It feels different. It feels like something I should have done 11 years earlier and didn't, because I believed in someone who ultimately didn't believe in me with the same completeness that I believed in him. That belief cost me a marriage, several years of my health, and about 4 years of genuine joy that I was too tired to access because I was working. I'm working on not calling that wasted. I'm working on calling it the price of the education. Dr. Amara said something to me a few months ago that I have been thinking about since. She said, recovery from a wound like this isn't about reaching a point where you stop feeling it. It's about reaching the point where it's something that happened to you rather than something that is happening to you, continuously, every day. Where it lives in your past tense rather than your present. I'm getting there. Some days it's past tense. Some days it's still present. I'm patient. I've always been patient. It's one of the things I'm best at. Thank you for staying with me through all of this. I know it was long. I know parts of it were complicated in ways that don't resolve into the clean shape a revenge story is supposed to have. I'm not going to apologize for that. I think you came here because you wanted something real, and real things are complicated. What I want to leave you with is this. Document everything, not because you're planning to use it, because you are someone who notices, and documentation is what noticing looks like when it's made useful. The records might sit in a folder for years, they might never matter. But if the moment arrives when they do, and for some of you that moment will come, you will be standing in it with something in your hands. That matters. And if you are giving everything you have to something that is not legally yours, if you are building on someone else's foundation and trusting that the trust itself will be enough, I want to gently, honestly say, get it in writing. Not because the people you trust are necessarily planning to betray you, but because love and legal protection are two different things, and having only one of them is a risk that lands entirely on you. The last thing I want to say is for anyone who is in the middle of their own version of this, who worked the longest, sacrificed the most, and is still watching someone else hold the thing they built. I know how that feels. I know the specific combination of rage and grief and exhaustion, and the strange pride of knowing exactly what you contributed even when no one else is naming it. You built it. The records know, the numbers know, and eventually, one way or another, the people with the authority to read those records get involved. File below. Tell me where you are in your own story. I read every single comment. And if this reached someone who needed to hear it tonight, pass it along. You never know who's sitting in a quiet kitchen at midnight trying to decide what to do with a folder. Take care of yourselves. I'll see you in the next one.